All right, the beer industry. This actually works, right? So obviously, in the interest of time, we're gonna get started here. So in terms of numbers, over 500 billion for the beer industry revenue in a recent 2011 projection. That's a lot of beer consumed. In terms of the top 10, there's been a lot of consolidation. In the mid-90s, the top 5 companies only made about 25% of the industry as a whole, but since then it's turned into about over 50 now, and that even is narrowed down to the top 4. You obviously see it in the news a lot of mergers. And so with that, we decided to focus on 3, SAB Miller, Heineken, and, while not in the top 10, Boston Beer Company is kind of a different perspective on their supply chain and everything. So just some visuals to get an idea of how global the beer industry is. This is importing. You can tell the colors are based on, we did not make this. This is borrowed from Wikipedia, but yeah, so obviously the U.S. is the biggest importer of beer, and based on Holland, and then with companies like Corona, the Netherlands is up there, as is Mexico. And so just to get an idea of growth in the beer industry, or declining growth, all the modernized markets are declining, but you can see there's an opportunity. Quality is growing overall in the world. The developing nations are definitely growth opportunities. And so with that, we're going to talk briefly about the logistics. Some of the challenges they deal with are temperature, obviously transporting beer, whether it be in cold climates or warm climates. They really have to allow freshness to stay. You have to really focus on that, and so that's always a challenge. And then demand fluctuates. There's a lot of seasonal beers with those kind of challenges. They have to do a lot with forecasting. And in terms of the process, pretty much the raw materials are very much outsourced, and then production is done in-house. And you obviously don't see any Bud Light stores. There's wholesalers that provide the service of middleman from the actual brewers to the customer. And in terms of what's important, obviously cycle time. In terms of freshness, like born on dating became a very popular marketing gimmick, but it also became an important metric because things like beer gets on the shelf, and if it stays too long, that becomes lost sales. And so with that, some of the challenges, which these guys will get into a little more detail, but the 5 trends and challenges we're noticing in the industry is demand for craft beers, the focus on the female customer, premiumization, which we detailed, but basically the opportunity for higher margins exists there, and with some of the declining beer sales on the lower end makes that an attractive industry. And then as mentioned, the emerging markets, and lastly, as mentioned as well, forecasting and demand. So with that, I will pass it on to Jason.
So as Will mentioned, the 3 beers we selected were Boston Beer, Heineken, and SAB Miller. So Boston Beer is the largest craft beer manufacturer in the U.S., and they focus really only on in the U.S. So their supply chain is a lot different than Heineken and SAB Miller. And their winning criteria is on quality and flexibility. Flexibility comes from their product innovation, so they're always making seasonal beers, trying to develop new products. Whereas Heineken and SAB Miller comes with service, so just availability to the customer. It's important that they're at bars, at all the retailers. But the difference between SAB Miller and Heineken is that Heineken really focuses on quality, premium beer. So their entire portfolio is only what they consider premium beers. And they both tend to are in acquisition mode so they're acquiring some local breweries in some of the developing world, and that's really their growth strategy at this point. So in that way, they're very similar. It's just kind of the quality of the product that distinguishes the two. So I think Brian's going to talk a little more detail about it.
So when ranking our 3 companies according to the challenges, we looked at kind of the good, better, best model on craft beers, focusing on female customers, premiumization, emerging and developed market expansion, and also demand forecasting. We ranked the Boston Beer Company as #1 on craft beers. They're kind of the original and best craft beer company in America going right now. They still have ties to the Boston region. They really make a lot of their sales on variety packs and also doing seasonal brews. As far as focusing on female customers, we see Saab Miller as really the forerunner with this trend. They've kind of gone away from some of the more brutish advertisements that you see with Bud Light and Budweiser to focus on a more sophisticated advertising campaign. They also have such an immense brand portfolio that they're able to offer low-calorie beers, flavorful beers, and also a variety of ciders that are much more appealing to the female customer. That doesn't mean, though, that other beer companies aren't hot on their heels, though, because Heineken actually produces the most cider of any beer company going right now. As far as premiumization, we're thinking about how people command a higher price point for their beers, either by marketing or using higher quality ingredients. And we see as Heineken, as Jason alluded to before, as being the front runner with that trend. Nearly every single beer product that that they're offering right now is really being marketed as a higher quality product. Emerging and developing market expansion is really led by Saab Miller. They're getting nearly all of their growth by going into emerging market areas. They're producing on 6 continents right now, and really their strategy is to find breweries that are doing successful in their region, in their local environment, buy them, use their world-class operations to expand them, and if they do well in that region, to push that onto into other areas where they might have mass appeal, and they've been doing it extremely well. As far as demand forecasting, we ranked Heineken as the #1 in that category. They've cut their order fulfillment cycle, shipping from Europe to America, which is one of their biggest customers, from 3 months about 10 years ago all the way down to 3 weeks. So they've been doing very well. Okay, Okay. As far as ranking the finances, we really had Boston Beer Company as being the #1 clear-cut winner with the finances. They have an advantage since they're primarily a domestic producer in a lot of the logistics categories that we've looked at in the class, being inventory turnover, days of inventory on hand. Saab Miller's done well with the profit margin, but we still kind of gave them the nod based on their logistics. So our key takeaways: Sam Adams being the clear winner in financial metrics, Saab Miller being very strong with expanding into developing markets, and Heineken being well positioned in the premium brand, and also they're exporting from Europe to the U.S. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next.
Why don't you go on next?
Yeah.
Doing presentations.
I stay.
We all have the latest, right? No, that's just old school.
Please use the microphone.
What's that?
The microphone so we can.
Right here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, we did the automotive industry. We really focused our paper and our research on the 5 challenges. We thought it was very important to highlight the challenges and go into really specific detail on exactly what the drivers were in each of those challenge areas. So here's a graphic that shows the 5 challenges we identified. First one being cost containment, new technologies, supply chain visibility and control across the entire supply chain platform, production flexibility on emerging market growth. The 3 companies we chose to analyze in the scope of these challenges were Ford, Volkswagen, and Toyota. What's interesting about these companies, they all have similar strategies of attacking the market from a global perspective, but they're all based in different countries, and they all have unique different strategies for how to attack global demand. So now, the next one. I'll let Juan talk a little bit about the industry overall.
Okay. Thanks, Tim. So here so obviously the auto industry is really global, but what was interesting when we pulled this up is that really almost half of sales are coming from Asia Pacific, but you also have just very strong presence in North America and Europe, and really it is all over. And it's also a fairly concentrated industry, so the top 4 firms have about 47–48%. Toyota actually just became #1 recently, a couple years ago. We've got GM, Volkswagen, and then Ford was number 6, but we decided that there was there's a lot of interesting stuff diving into Ford a little bit more in detail. Well, another interesting thing we looked at here was that the auto parts supplier industry is significantly less concentrated, but not as much as we thought. It's about 30% is the top 4 firms as opposed to nearly 50%. But when we look into the different parts, there are some industries that are heavily concentrated. So tires is actually 63%, so they're more concentrated than auto manufacturers. And in steering and suspension, they're 90%. So there's one firm that has 50% of the market in steering and suspension. So there really is a lot of interesting dynamics in that. So probably next slide. And here, I guess, these are the 5 that we just outlined. I think we're going to dive into a couple of them, just give some high-level outlooks onto each. So Tim?
Yeah. Just real quick on cost containment, there's 2 big issues. The first one is rising manufacturing costs in China. As you can see from this chart, 25% of all automotive manufacturing is done in China, and over the last 4 years, the average manufacturing wage growth has been 14.5%. So costs are most certainly rising, and this is something all of the manufacturers will have to deal with, either reducing costs in other areas of the supply chain or shifting production to other low-cost countries as the global manufacturing market changes. The second biggest challenge in cost containment is how to deal with today's standard features. So what we're talking about here is an upgraded expectation for consumers in terms of what is considered standard. So you have advanced infotainment systems, you have things like heated seats, heated steering, you have additional safety features that are now sort of assumed as standard in the consumer's mindset. So manufacturers are having to build these products into their standard vehicle sets, which is obviously increasing the cost to make their standard sets.
And as to this next one, so this is technological change. And obviously we've all heard of the hybrids and the electric cars, but what we wanted to highlight here is that, you've had 100 years of gasoline-powered engines. You're actually seeing a lot more of differentiation in the engine. So not just hybrid and electric, but you've also got advanced diesels making a comeback. You're hearing about hydrogen cars in the surrounding. Essentially there's a lot of fundamental changes in the technology that cars are going to have to adapt to.
One of the other challenges we identified was supply chain visibility. So you can define visibility as basically knowing every part that's in transit on the way to your plant or out of your plant. How do you know how many units are in transit, what it's costing you, what does that shipment data look like, cycle times? Actually capturing this information is much harder than it would seem. That's because with some of these auto manufacturers, their supply chain networks are so diverse that systems don't really talk to one another. And so having visibility into, you can't manage what you can't measure, right? So having visibility into where all of your assets are in the supply chain is really important to elevating perfect order rates, making sure that things get to where they need to be on time, especially in an industry where everything in the supply chain in some cases can cost so much. Examples are pretty powerful. So one example we put in here was in the 2011 tsunami. That caused a huge dip in the availability of some auto parts in the supply chain. And so companies that had really strong visibility mechanisms, they could sort of pivot pretty quickly. They could find alternative approaches to get what they needed. They could also revise some of their transportation systems, accommodate new shipments, reconfigure their warehouses to accommodate new suppliers or alternative suppliers. Like I said, I think one of the barriers to this visibility, the companies that do this well, they call it a control tower approach, where all the systems and the processes are well integrated. But again, like I said, this is certainly easier said than done. But if you have that information, if you have rapid access to that information, you can do a lot of important things with it. Production flexibility. In the bricks, demand uncertainty is rising. That's because subcompact cars, which we're typically focused on for some of the developing nations, are no longer as much the focus. Some of these developing nations are demanding higher quality, not just higher quality, but also more sort of accoutrements in their cars. Things that used to be sort of defined as luxurious, like internet access in your car or hybrid engines, those are becoming more commonplace. In some cases, they're becoming almost ubiquitous. And so we're seeing that for some of these organizations, covering for Travis, he built the slide, so this surprises me a little bit.
That was good.
But we are seeing that Audi, if you take a look at some of Audi's cars, you know, the conglomerate Audi, they own obviously the Audi brand, but they also own companies like Volkswagen. So if you look at the Volkswagen 4x4, I think this is the Touareg, and if you look at Porsche Boxster, the Cayenne, and if you look at the Audi Q models, those 4x4s, it doesn't take long to look at them to recognize that they're probably all the same chassis. And so those chassis are really a good example of postponement, where they're delaying the customization of these automobiles until, as long as they can possibly delay it, to reduce costs in the supply chain.
One more. So I think everybody touched on the emerging market. This is especially true in the automotive industry. By 2020, emerging markets are going to account for approximately 2/3 of total automotive profit, and the penetration rates are very low. It's only 1 in 40 people in India have a car, still only 1 in 20 in China. So it's a huge challenge as to how you can adapt your supply chain to do so. And he set us up perfectly with the global model. So there's a large pressure for local responsiveness, and then the global integration as to how you're going to ship parts from afar, or are you going to do it local. So, 3 of the examples of the challenges, Ford has been really good at adapting their products to the local markets. They have a new global small car model called the Ka coming out that is based off of a common chassis platform that Bobby touched on that will be able to go to many of these new markets. Volkswagen has been very, very good in their localization of the production. So they have a very systematic approach where they won't just go into a new emerging market and build a facility, but they spend time establishing relationships with other companies in the area, with the governments, and then over a 5-10 year span, then they'll actually put the production facilities in once they have a better feel for what the demand variability is and what the customization to that market needs to be. Lastly, with the decentralizing of decision making. So it's hard to be global when somebody in Japan is making all the decisions. So one of the things that we actually talked about in class in order to be global is shifting power away from that central unit. So Toyota did this very well in 2011 where for their European operations, they moved most of the decision-making power away from Japan, where it previously was, into Europe to be able to respond quickly to local needs.
Okay.
Fine.
Will you admit us one more point, or is it?
30 seconds.
Okay. Sorry guys, I thought this was a really neat thing. You can actually see the qualifying winning criteria within the way the suppliers are set up. So Toyota suppliers are much more concentrated, about 22% versus Ford with only 15 and Volkswagen with 9 as their top 5. And if you look at their percentage of supplier revenues, I mean, these are much heavier partnerships, or they're really accounting for about half. Whereas you look at someone like Ford, they're actually a lot smaller customer than Toyota. So this was kind of a really neat in circumstance where flexibility and service was much more important to Toyota, whereas cost and service were much more towards Volkswagen and Ford. So.
You all send me please the PowerPoint, via email to me, and also the electronic version of it. Thank you. Great.
Good afternoon, at this point, everybody. We're going to talk about beverages real quick. Talk about the beverage industry as a whole. It's actually, the beverage industry is $1.3 trillion, so it's a very big industry when it's consumer just drinking things. The annual per capita consumption in gallons of the various products. We have coffee at 17, we have milk at 19, we have beer at 20, we have bottled water at 38, and soda at 42. And Professor, if you want to pay attention to this real quick, everybody, you got to pay attention to the slides. No, we're not talking about those. Indeed, we're talking about beer. That was especially animation for Professor. No problem. The three companies we decided to talk about were Diageo, SAB Miller, and Grupo Modelo. It's very interesting that these three companies are all global multinational companies, but they have three very different approaches to supply chain management. We felt they were very good companies to focus on because of their different approaches to supply chain management. Diageo does a lot with postponement. SAB Miller embraces the local model, and Grupo Modelo does everything centrally and distributes out. So three very different supply chain management techniques and three large multinational beer companies. The global beer market is $141 billion, so very large. And if you think about distribution within the beer market, everybody remembers living on the third floor apartment, and carrying a case of beer up there is not easy. You take that and add and buy $141 billion worth of beer, getting it around the world becomes a serious issue. And it's growing at 3.7% annually. Here's the categories of the beer market. As we saw, it's growing 3.7% annually, so it's indeed a mature market. In fact, from 2008 to 2011, the beer market actually shrank and didn't start growing again until 2012. With that, I'll pass it over to Art.
So as Dale mentioned, these three companies have very different supply chains. Grupo Modelo has a very hub and spoke style supply chain where everything's basically manufactured in Mexico and then distributed across the globe. SAB Miller has a very local approach to manufacturing, so they have many many breweries across the world so that they can actually modify and actually keep the quality the same for the local markets. And then Guinness actually has kind of a hybrid approach where most of the North American based Guinness is actually brewed in Dublin and then shipped over via ocean transport. But in their African models, they actually do syrup based and then produce it there. And they also have a local factory in Africa. The key challenges we wanted to talk about really is importing to the country, and then once it's in the country, how to distribute that within the country, procurement strategy with the raw materials particularly, demand forecasting, and then the sustainability aspect, which is associated with procurement in terms of water sustainability, because water is such an intensive part of the beverage process. So as I mentioned, Grupo Modelo has a very hub and spoke, brewed in Mexico, heavy reliance on third-party distributors. For procurement, they have the NAFTA, so they actually are able to procure their hops, barley, and grain from North America, so they really don't have that issue as the other two do. Demand forecasting, they are a lot of, like Miller, focused on promotions and really trying to drive up demand, but also can increase variability with that aspect. And then water sustainability, so they have implemented a technology so that they can actually use and have insight into their consumption costs. Guinness, on the other hand, they have barley supplied strictly from, instead of using barley in Africa, they actually use an alternative called sorghum as a substitute, which is also it's also preferred by their African customers. So they actually switch supplies and a natural ingredient for the pure consumption. I think that's pretty much it. Here are the numbers. So we want to just show you the numbers. Most, it's pretty much all over the table. But, when we look at really the top five, you actually look, they're actually pretty similar in terms of, GM and a little bit on the ROE, but we think this is an outlier here. But in the most important reporting year, you see actually a consolidation with all the global change. So, any interesting questions? All right.
Hello, we do consumer goods and our teammates are Stella, Jen, and Sahil, and Kyoko, and Karen. We focus on cosmetics and beauty product industries in consumer goods. This industry is estimated with about $220 billion total as in market, and with an overall about 30% profitability. And the current drivers of demand, mainly from emerging markets, are the level of disposable income, the demand from retailers, such as the growing of specialty and department stores, and the demographic growth. We choose Unilever, P&G, and L'Oreal as our target companies because they are 3 out of the top 5 companies with market share. And we think for Unilever and P&G, quality and service are their winning criteria. Since for both companies, the switching cost of consumer is not very high. So making sure that their products are on the shelf is pretty important. As for L'Oreal, we think quality and flexibility instead is winning criteria, since innovation and novelty are what they want to provide for their consumers.
And for our industry, we follow the typical logistics system, but we think that the key profitability and ROI driver is in product development, demand forecasting, and sales distribution. Because as you know, in this industry, new product get introduced to the market, and innovation is one of the key main driver and competitive advantage. And due to that, so our demand forecasting is really important, since we don't have that relevant reference to estimate and forecast our demand. And within the 3 companies that we researched in, since they have strong brand position, so sales distribution allocation is important to capture those profitability. And for these 3 companies, P&G and Unilever, since we think that they source globally, and cost efficiency and utilization is what they focus on. They are more resource-oriented logistics. As for L'Oreal, it's emphasized on quality and flexibility. For example, they have this new mobile app that's called the Collagenous. So it's an interactive app that you upload the profile photos, and it will give you personalized advice for your makeup. And also, L'Oreal will take in the review of the customer to further adjust their product development and their new product introduction. So we think that they're a more user-oriented logistics. Now pass on to Sahil for the key challenges.
So we identify the 5 challenges for all these 3 companies. The first one is adapting to local markets. So if you look at the trend in the global industry, so the developed markets are getting saturated. Now they have to approach the emerging markets. But emerging markets are very different from the developed markets. You need a different product, customization, you need different kind of supply chain, you need to have a different marketing campaign for them. But when we look at all 3 of these companies, they are doing a very excellent job at adapting to local markets. So the differentiation comes from the second challenge, that is the demand variability. Now these products are very much similar in the way they are used, and so the only way to be lean in an operation is to be able to predict the variability in demand properly. And we see that Unilever and L'Oreal are doing an excellent job at it, but P&G, they started a consumer-driven supply network, but it's a very tightly coupled model in which they have to work very closely with the retailer. And this model cannot be applied to the other retailers. So that's why we say that they're doing an average job at it. And then third is the shorter products life cycle. The industry is very competitive. There are new innovations coming up every month and every week. The consumer preferences are changing, the demographics are also changing. So the life cycle of the product itself becomes very short. And the life cycle includes innovation, the product manufacturing, the communicating the brand to the consumers, and then managing the supply chain of it. So, so this puts a lot of pressure on the supply chain, and you need to maintain lower inventory levels to be successful in this industry. And we think P&G is doing an excellent job at it, and because they are managing the whole supply chain through local control towers, which are established in all these local places. And the fourth challenge is the environment impact and sustainability concerns. Now, this challenge comes from two different aspects. One is consumers. They are becoming more aware that there is an impact of whatever they consume on the environment. And the second impact is, second point is from the government. Now, there are many government regulations which say that if you want to manufacture these products, you have to comply to certain regulations which decrease the environment impact. Now, Unilever and L'Oreal are doing a very good job at it, but P&G is okay, but they are good at communicating those values to the consumer through the CSR activities and sustainability reports. L'Oreal works with in eco-friendly production model, which are very efficient. Now, the last but not the least is the incorporating new technology into operations. The technologies could be at the communication channels, or at the manufacturing level, or the supply chain process. So all of these, if you look at all of these together, you'll see that L'Oreal is doing an excellent job at it, because they have cloud-based platform which links the factories, and they have an e-commerce mobile app. E-commerce is a different model altogether, which demands a completely different set of operations, and they are handling it very well as compared to if you look at P&G, where they are working on P&G every day, which is just a platform to give promotions to their customers. So this is the analysis, and now I'll hand over to Jen for the financial analysis.
Thanks, Sia. So we compared the three companies on financial metrics, and we try to focus in on the cosmetics and beauty product line within each, though we all know that Unilever and P&G are kind of larger organizations, so we look at some metrics for those overall. We see for the cosmetics and beauty that L'Oreal comes out on top with the profit margins. I'd also like to point out that their return on CapEx is also considerably higher, which means that they're using their assets more efficiently, as well as working capital. And then just in the interest of time, I guess, we'll skip down to the winner, we think, is L'Oreal. Because of the reasons my colleagues mentioned about the key challenges, we think they're facing those a bit better. And also performance evaluation, they're keeping up in different ways with the other larger multinational companies.
Good. Thank you.
Are we the last group?
Nope. We have someone. Come on.
Alright, so we are Automobile Group 3, and our team members are Ken, I, and there are two more members who are not here, Meena and Yi. So we looked at the automobile industry and looked at the overall industry overview. It appears that this is an $800 billion global industry, which sold 80 million vehicles last year. And over the next 5 or 6 years, we are expecting that this demand would go up by approximately 20% to 100 million vehicles by 2020. There was some brief hiccup during this journey previously, because last decade observed a growth of 30% from 2000 to 2010, and there was a brief hiccup period during the recession when there was less demand. An interesting shift that has been observed in this market is that over the last couple of decades, there has been an emergence of economic growth in many of the non-traditional regions in the world. So a couple of decades back, it was mostly Northern America, Western Europe, Japan, who were the major automobile buyers. But now since 1990, in the last 2 decades, many of the emerging markets in Asia and Middle East and Africa have really risen. And that has posed a lot of challenges for the automobile manufacturers. There's a new demand elsewhere. Automobile manufacturers have to go out to meet that demand, and now there is increased competition because they are now not only competing with other global brands, but they are also competing with local manufacturers in those markets. An interesting example is that now China is the world's largest producer in number of units of vehicles. China is not only a ground for serving Chinese market, but it's also automobile companies are using China as a ground to export these vehicles to other areas. It's a highly labor and capital intensive industry, and there is a lot of R&D spent because of regulatory changes, because of demand changes, because of customer requirements that are changing. Firms are spending a lot of R&D to invent new, more efficient vehicles, fuel cells, battery operated vehicles, stuff like that. So this shows the change in sales patterns globally in the last 5 years. And there are some very interesting things. If you see, Europe comprised 39% of global sales in 2007, and now in 2012 this has only reduced to 27%. Compare this with China, which was 12% a few years back, and now it's 26% of the global sales. So this shows that sales are shifting, but behind the scenes it's posing a lot of challenges for the supply chain. How firms manage their logistics, how do they export, import, where do they make new capital investments, and it's a lot of new challenges that firms are facing. This is a typical automotive industry supply chain. We of course borrowed it from the source. We are right in the OEMs space for our industry because we thought that automobile assemblers like General Motors or companies that we have chosen are more of assemblers rather than a producer of the small components. And for our industry analysis, we have chosen the top 3 automobile makers in this industry: Toyota, General Motors, and Volkswagen. That's an inverted W by the way. So Toyota a few years back, in 2008 or 2009, surpassed General Motors, which was until then the largest automobile manufacturer in the world, and now it's Toyota. And we thought that these 3 would be very interesting companies because they belong to very different regions of the world. Toyota is based out of Japan. GM is an American firm, as we all know. Volkswagen is German. And they all are also interesting from the perspective that they cater to various different customer segments. They all have low price, mid price, and high priced vehicles. So we thought that would be an interesting comparison. And now Ken will talk about challenges.
All right. So we identified 5 challenges. I'll start with the disruptive technologies. I think the other group touched on this as well. We're expecting at some point in the near future the technologies to evolve that may prove disruptive to the industry, as just hydrogen fuel cells may become more viable. I think Tesla has showed that you can have an all-electric car that is popular and profitable. Second, in terms of regulatory changes, the U.S. recently mandated that each automobile manufacturer have an average miles per gallon of about 55 by the year 2025. So each automobile manufacturer is going to be scrambling to hit that target. Third, the complexity and cost pressure. Markets are demanding more specific vehicles, yet at the same time, companies are trying to keep costs down by evolving common platforms. And that leads into the 4th challenge, the divergent markets. Each market is demanding a specific kind of vehicle. There are different consumer preferences in each market, and balancing the cost savings of a common platform and adapting to local tastes is something that each automobile manufacturer is dealing with. And finally, digital demands. Consumers want more and more connectivity with their vehicles, whether it's through a navigation system, through having an iPod hookup, apps that could do remote start, those kind of things are rising. And in terms of trends, other trends that we see coming is artificial intelligence. Everybody has heard about Google's self-driving car, but it's not just fantasy. I mean, a lot of car manufacturers are introducing things that would, like an alarm that goes off if you veer out of your lane, adaptive cruise control that maintains your speed. Hybrids are becoming more prevalent, and the last three trends, fierce competition, capital investment, and continuous efficiency improvements, those are trends that relate to the challenge of matching complexity and cost pressure. I'll run through the responses by the global big three really quickly. In terms of regulatory changes, both GM and Toyota and Volkswagen, they're all working towards introducing more hybrid vehicles. Volkswagen is taking a different approach. They're focusing more on diesel-powered autos. And in terms of cost pressure, GM and Volkswagen are focusing on common platforms, while Toyota is working more on its sourcing. And in terms of the diverging markets, I think you can see that General Motors has the largest share of its sales going to emerging markets. So we can say that it's the leader there. In terms of supply chain management, you can see that typically companies will manufacture in-house the most critical components, such as the powertrain, transmission, and they'll outsource more commodity products like brakes, tires, window glass, and seats, and so on. We identified the winning and qualifying criteria for each of these. GM on cost and service, Volkswagen on quality and flexibility, Toyota on cost and quality. Volkswagen obviously is renowned for their German engineering quality, Toyota for their price, GM as well for price, and GM also for service. I think GM is viewed more as a commodity vehicle, and their customers aren't willing to compromise on service. And finally, just to go over the financial metrics, we thought this was pretty interesting that Volkswagen is far and away leading in terms of profitability. GM is doing the best with their cash-to-cash cycle, and Toyota is sort of middle of the pack, but I think this is more of a lingering effect from the tsunami and the earthquake and tsunami effects that affected their supply chain. So I think we would identify Volkswagen as the leader. As they can improve their cash-to-cash cycle, they will be far and away the leader. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, one more.
We are going to talk about smartphone today. The reason we choose smartphone because it's a very popular product in the market now, and it's also a very large market. And next slide. If you look at global consumer electronics market, it's a $1 trillion business, and smartphone contribute to 51% of revenue in this market. It's about $500 billion. And the global smartphone market is dominated by Apple and Samsung. Samsung is leading the market with 32% share, and Apple is the second. In the second place has 12% share. Lenovo only have 5%. And China is the largest smartphone market in the world, and the US market is the second largest. Our analysis today will focus on the US market. And we choose the top 3 brands in the US to illustrate the industry. And these 3 companies are Apple, Samsung, and HTC. And again, Apple and Samsung are dominating this market. Together they have 65 market share, and HTC only has 7%. And smartphone industry is very competitive. For example, BlackBerry was once the leader in the market, but now the company is on market for sale. And Nokia is acquired by Microsoft, and Motorola is acquired by Google. These companies fail so suddenly because there are many challenges in this industry, and we have identified 5 major challenges. The first one is short product life cycle. The average life cycle for a smartphone is 6 to 9 months. And the life cycle is so short because consumers, they are demanding new product. And also because phone makers, they have the technologies to develop new product in a short period of time. And also if Apple introduces a new product to the market, Samsung must introduce a new product to stay competitive. And the second challenge is demand forecast. Demand forecast is very difficult in this market because new models are introduced to the market every month, and each new product launch will affect the demand of other models. And the third challenge is distribution management. Phone makers, they need to give retailers good margins in order to make them carry their brand in the retail store. And so it is very important for the makers to keep their production costs low enough so that they can still have good margin after they give some margin to retailers. And also retailers will ask manufacturers to provide extra support in activities such as promotions, logistics, and after-sales service. And the fourth challenge is after-sales service. Manufacturers can build and operate their own service center, and this is the best way to give high-quality service to customers. But this is very costly. And the other option is to outsource the service. But the challenge will be how to control the quality of the service. And the final challenge is managing growth. It is now becoming more and more difficult to sell smartphone to customers because many people who want a smartphone already have one. So manufacturers, they need to convince customers to replace their existing phone, even though their phone still works fine now. Okay, so these are the challenges.
Apple is not really vertically integrated compared to Samsung and HTC. Mainly partner with Foxconn, located in China. So the way Apple control its supply chain is to share information with its suppliers and also use the pre-orders to forecast the demand and keeps inventory as work in progress. Also, the 2 model strategy used to be one. Is very helpful to make the supply chain simplified and also increase its buying power. For the winning criteria, we think quality obviously is the winning criteria. Not because it really has the best quality ever, but even if Samsung Galaxy has a better camera or faster processor, still Apple makes you feel the iPhone is the best quality and is the best phone ever before. So quality definitely for sure, and flexibility. You must think why 2 models can be flexible. But yes, the answer is yes because it actually meets the customer's need. Actually, iPhone foresee the needs accurately for the customer. So even with 2 models, the customer still feel it's customized for them. Therefore, we agree that flexibility, even though it doesn't really appear obviously, but it's definitely the winning criteria for Apple. Next, Samsung is highly vertically integrated, so and with global footprint. So in order to be local, Samsung has 15 regional headquarters. So the headquarters, they develop localized strategy for each different regions. And the winning criteria for Samsung, we believe to be service and flexibility. For service, it's very important for companies has headquarters in outside the United States. So in order to have the sales in the United States, it has to be available on all the retail, all the carriers, and be available as much as possible. So whenever customer wants it, they have to get it. They cannot afford to lose the sales to any potential delay in inventory or any kind. And flexibility, they don't just have one Galaxy. They have Galaxy 4S, Galaxy Note, and Galaxy Vega for different kind of customer, different needs. And next is the HTC. You can see how small it is, and how can this guy compete with Apple and Samsung? However, in the third quarter of 2011, it was number one in the market. Number one market share was 24%. But nowadays, it's like 7%. What happened? Later we'll discuss, but for HTC, it's definitely facing a serious competition. And also the 5 challenges, it just didn't really work very well to overcome them. And that's why we believe for HTC, the winning criteria should be the cost and the service. The cost, actually, right now the price for HTC phone is 20 to 30% lower than Apple or Samsung, even with a little bit better quality. But remember, cost is not the price, right? However, with this low margin, it has to think about a way to lower the cost in order to provide this kind of advantage. The brand is simply just too weak, and I think Aeromat needs to work harder. And for the service, of course, it has to be, for the same reason with the Samsung phone, it has to be available at all the major retail stores and carriers in the United States. Next. So this is just a summarized graph, the table for all 3 competitors, and we can see for Apple, the loyal customer and the brand equities definitely makes it number 1 in the market. And for Samsung, it's repositioning and trying to be flexible and be available. For HTC, we think it has to play safe and make sure that the cost is low and with a very good availability. Next, Kevin, what about you?
So we did a logistic performance gap analysis, and this is pretty much the metrics that we utilize. Obviously, Apple kind of supersedes or takes a superior position against the Samsung or HTC. And one unique thing that we realize is Samsung's cash convention cycle, which is only the positive figure, and of course, what we learned from the class is it should be negative. And so what we did is a little further research, reviewing the sustainability report of 2013, and we realized that one of the Samsung's core strategy for their partners and suppliers is mutual success and mutual survival. Meaning, through that strategy, what they were doing is they're paying the payables, the invoice and bills upfront before the deadline. So if the term is net 60 days or 90 days, whenever the required contract is completed by the supplier, they pay upfront. So that's why they are kind of following their CSR strategy, and cash convention cycle turned out to be positive. So again, I'm sure everybody knows and expecting that Apple is the winner, and so, analysis also definitely in numbers, allocate that, indicate that as well. Nothing much to say about Apple being winner, so that's pretty much it.
Thank you. Okay, last but not least.
So half of my team is not here, but still we'll go through. We're gonna take less of your time, as I know most of you want to go out. So let's forget the agenda and move to the next slide. Let's go to the next one. So the companies what we are looking at are basically food and the home products business. The three companies we would be analyzing are General Mills, Kimberly-Clark, and P&G. The characteristics of this CPG companies can be looked from two different angles. One is from the consumer side and one is from the manufacturer's end. From the consumer side, as you might see, basically the consumer wants to go for a product which is on the shelf, which is easy to buy, which is low price product. And so there's low, as Professor mentioned, there's a very low switching cost. Once you go for a product such as soup, you don't see which is available. What is available on the shelf, you just purchase it. From the manufacturer's point of view, the distribution network tends to be very complex because it's a low volume product, as you can see. And at the same point of time, the different patterns of demand are different for each and every retailer, let's say Walmart or someone else. And when most of the time the demand over here, the demand is you tend to fulfill the demand. That's how it works. So there's intense competition, as you might be knowing, because the advertisement costs are high, prices goes down. So I'll just go to the next slide. That's a good idea. So as most of you had already mentioned, the changes are taking place because of the emerging middle class segment. Because of the emerging middle class, previously these companies used to segment or bracket their products into two different categories, which used to be a high-end product and which used to be a low-end product. But because of the evolving middle class, they can't really put their products, the same products to this kind of a segment. So what they do is they come with a third product, which is better in quality than the lower middle class, but has a lower price than the higher middle class, than the high-end product. So this is a good quality product, but at a lower price. So at the same point of time, the digital consumer, the purchase of goods through the digital channel has been increasing. Most of you might have an idea that in New York they've started shopping CPG goods through online stores. And as I said, there's a shift to value. Most of the consumers are purchasing goods based on value basis rather than anything else. The raw material cost is increasing because of two different dimensions. One, because obviously people are purchasing more CPG goods because of the increasing level of income. At the same point of time, since their level of income is increasing, they are they afford basic necessities of, like, let's say wheat, rice, etc., which is again raw material ingredient being used in these kind of companies. Lastly, most of these companies have been going for sustainability initiatives. That is primarily because of government regulations, as well as it helps them to cut down on their cost of transportation and everything else. So I'll just briefly touch upon on the points which I didn't have mentioned before. So increasing costs, I've already done that. Growing complexity in supply chain, that is primarily because, as I said, it's a low volume product. You have to make sure that your route scheduling is proper, and you visit the stores at the right moment so that you face less costs while delivering the product to the end consumer. The complex distribution also results from this, because the complex distribution results from because of the more SKUs they handle, at the same point of time, the route scheduling they have to do. And the same day next delivery arises because of most of the purchasing happening on the internet basis, on the internet. So these are the CPG companies which are basically all over, which are in the market and their products. But as I said, we would be focusing only on three. I won't go one by one to each one of them, but I'll try to just point to three things which each of the company is doing different. P&G is basically trying to rationalize its centers. They're trying to bring in different divisions together to cut down their costs, and at the same point of time, it helps them to cut down the time between researching a product and bringing it down to the market. So the R&D, the time they start their developing the product and building it to the market is very less. Kimberly-Clark has basically focused a lot on technology. They have used advances in technologies like SAP. At the same point of time, they have used a system which is called JDA's transportation system. What this does is, this looks for the supplier which has the lowest cost, picks up that supplier for the day, and allocates the order to the supplier without even a manual intervention. So this is what they have done. General Mills, on the other hand, has focused a lot on sustainability initiatives. This helps them to cut down their costs, because if you see the diesel prices, they have been fluctuating a lot. And if you switch to natural gas, it's cheaper, as well as you can make sure that the variability in diesel price is also taken care of. Next, Jansen will go through the...
All right, just running through quickly with the financials. Basically, we see P&G as outperforming the other companies when it comes to profitability measures. So they have the highest gross margin, highest EBIT margin, and even the highest profit margin. This is because of their commitment to reducing costs. So they are already the biggest of these companies, but at the same time, because of scale efficiencies, they are able to reduce their costs to a minimum. The other noteworthy thing is looking at, return on equity for Kimberly-Clark. Kimberly-Clark would be a relatively smaller company than P&G, and this is why their revenues or their net income, when you compare them to their equity, which is assets minus liabilities, would tend to go up. Actually, coming from 2011 to 2012, they actually increased liabilities, which would reduce equity, which is somewhat skewing this number. But when you increase sales and equity goes down, you tend to show a better ROE. So you have to be careful with these measures. But also, just quickly looking at the cash conversion cycle, we see that P&G has a very negative number, which is supposed to be good. This means that they're able to negotiate better contracts with their suppliers, meaning they can postpone payments longer, and at the same time they have better collections, meaning they're able to collect faster from their clients. Basically, anything else? The rest is self-explanatory. Quickly. Okay, so this is basically a summary of everything we've talked about. Basically, we see everyone as being information-oriented. They have advances in IT that helps them to cope with the changing needs of customers, improving their logistics based on real demand. He mentioned time to market. That's something that P&G is doing very well right now. He mentioned Kimberly-Clark's focus on technology to bring better distribution, and the same for General Mills. So obviously P&G is the winner, no doubt about it. Yes, that's what I